The thing about peace is you don't really notice how precious it is until somebody tries to take it from you. And that morning, watching a pastel cardigan hurricane named Karen roll my rain barrels down the hillside like she was staging some HOA-approved burglary Olympics, I felt something inside me snap. Not loud, not violent, just a quiet, "Well, hell, here we go then," kind of snap. Like life was tapping me on the shoulder saying you didn't think she'd stop at gossip and warning notes, did you? I didn't yell, didn't sprint down the slope like a madman. I just stood there on my old porch boards that creak like they're whispering the past, holding my coffee, watching her huff and puff as she manhandled those big blue barrels toward her shiny metal tanks. And I swear to you, I didn't know whether to laugh or go fetch a sheriff and a tranquilizer dart. Some folks steal jewelry. Some folks snatch Amazon packages. Karen? She steals rain cylinders like she's liberating oppressed stormwater. Now before I throw you right into the fire with me, you need to understand where I come from, what this place means to me, because if you don't feel the cabin under your feet the way I do, if you don't smell pine sap in your lungs, if you don't hear the mountain wind tug at your thoughts, this whole thing might just sound like petty neighbor drama, and it wasn't, not even close. 15 years ago, I took a patch of hillside overlooking the northern Rockies, 3 acres of wild where the world feels bigger and quieter than any man deserves, and I built a cabin with my own stubborn 2 hands, plank by plank, nail by nail, splinters and bruised knuckles and nights falling asleep to the smell of fresh-cut wood and the ache of work done right. No contractors, no fancy upgrades, just me, my old pickup, and a stubborn kind of peace that grows slow but roots deep. My mornings became sacred here, a chipped mug of coffee steaming in the cool air, pine needles glistening with dew like nature sprinkled diamonds just for me. The wind rushing through the treetops like a quiet ocean wave rolling over you, clearing out whatever noise life tried to stick in your head. And sometimes I'd stand on the porch barefoot just to feel the boards settle like they were breathing along with me. I set up rain barrels early on, lined under the roof edge, and a couple tucked near the pine grove. Because when you live out here, you don't wait for some city department or overpriced delivery service to bless you with water like they're feeding pigeons in a park. You take what the mountains give you, filter it, use it wisely, and you feel grateful every single time. Not everyone knows this, but pine runoff carries a little bit of acidity, harmless if you know what you're doing. Useful even. It cuts rust right off old metal when you let it sit right, like nature's vinegar. So I kept certain barrels for tool cleaning, strip work, workshop needs, labeled in my head and routine. Never once thinking a stranger would march in and lay claim like she was annexing territory for some kingdom of cul-de-sac royalty. But then she arrived. Karen, that was truly her name. And trust me, the name was the least dramatic thing about her, like a suburban storm cloud drifting into mountain sky. Armed with a clipboard, posture so stiff you'd think she swallowed a yardstick, and a face that always looked one misplaced leaf away from filing a complaint with God himself. She didn't just move here. She invaded, marched like she was inspecting troops, parked her gleaming SUV at perfect angles like it needed to win a parking contest, arranged little white decorative stones in her yard like she was curating a museum exhibit on nature tamed by HOA rules, and planted a cute little sign in the soil that read, "HOA rules keep us safe. Out here, where the only things threatening you are gravity, weather, and your own stupidity." I laughed the first time I saw it, out loud, which maybe was my first mistake, because something in her eyes told me she clocked that laugh, filed it under future crimes, and started treating me like I was the neighborhood outlaw in her imaginary suburban empire. At first, it was passive-aggressive notes, slipped under my gate like teenage threats. Your wood pile is unsightly. Your porch railing is not up to aesthetic standard. Rain barrels attract mosquitoes and violate community water standards. Community? Lady, I haven't seen another human within a mile since the Obama administration. I ignored her, because when you feed a fire attention, it burns hotter, and I figured she'd get bored eventually, fade out like a restless summer storm. But no, she escalated, snapping pictures at my fence line like some rogue property inspector with the world's most useless badge. Then came the official-looking printed letter, her name at the bottom beside, HOA Secretary, like she'd held elections in her living room with a mirror and a potted fern, and I swear she underlined failure to comply will result in HOA action. like she was about to roll in tanks and enforce patio cushion regulations at gunpoint. I tossed the letter into my wood stove, watched it curl and burn like all nonsense deserves. But still, a man can only take so much absurdity before he wonders if fate has a twisted sense of humor. And then one morning after a hard rain, I walked out toward my barrels, planning to check water levels, and 3 were gone, vanished like a magic trick performed by someone with the personality of a filing cabinet. Except magic didn't drag trenches through wet soil, and sure enough, muddy grooves cut across my property toward Karen's perfectly trimmed border, right up to her shiny steel tanks like she'd rescued endangered barrels from an abusive wilderness home. I stood there, jaw tightening, pulse slow but steady, that kind of anger that doesn't yell, just exists, like a coiled rope waiting. And then she walked out, pastel jogging suit, hose in hand, looking proud enough you'd think she just pulled off a humanitarian mission, and I called to her steady but sharp. "What do you think you're doing with my barrels?" She didn't flinch, didn't even look embarrassed, just lifted her chin like she'd spent her whole life practicing superiority in a mirror, and responded, "They were improperly placed on shared land. I'm repurposing them for the community." I almost applauded the audacity, really, because it takes a special breed of confident delusion to steal someone's property and call it community service. "You have until sundown to bring them back," I told her, voice low enough to let her know I meant every syllable, "or I'll make a call you're not gonna like." She smirked, turned her back, and strutted like I was a child throwing a tantrum over toys. And that was the moment, the exact heartbeat, that I decided if she wanted lessons life never gave her, the mountain was happy to teach. Because she didn't take water. She took acidic runoff I used to strip rust off tools, and she was piping it straight into virgin steel tanks. I could have warned her, I could have stopped it, but sometimes the world hands out natural consequences like a teacher handing out pop quizzes, and who am I to interfere with such poetic education? So I sat on my porch the next morning, sharpening a hatchet like any peaceful man does, when her scream tore across the ridge. And trust me, the show had just begun. You ever hear a sound so dramatic it makes birds lift off like God just slapped the forest awake? That was the noise that morning, not just Karen's scream. Though trust me, that woman could shred bark off trees with her vocal cords. But the sharp metallic crack that followed, like a soda can popping times 1,000, echoing off the ridge and rolling through the pines like thunder that skipped rehearsal but nailed the performance. I stepped onto my porch slow, hatchet still in hand because, hey, I was sharpening it anyway, not because I expected to need it, but let's be honest, it did add a certain cinematic flair to the moment. And there she was, the HOA queen herself, running around her yard in a fluffy bathrobe that looked like it cost more than my truck, hands flailing at her precious silver tanks as brown streaks poured down their sides and water sprayed out through ragged holes like a busted fire hydrant having an identity crisis. "Problem, Karen?" I called, sipping my coffee like I was commentating on nature footage. She spun, hair wild, robe soaked, looking like a wet cat that just realized the universe isn't centered around it after all, and shrieked, "What did you do?" It took everything in me not to laugh right there, because there is a very specific kind of satisfaction in watching someone who treats you like you're beneath them suddenly realize they don't actually understand the world they're trying to control. "I didn't do anything," I said, calm as a still lake in winter, leaning on the porch railing. "You stole water I used to strip rust off old tools. That runoff's a little spirited, let's say, when it meets bare steel." Her jaw worked like she was trying to chew her own outrage into a new form of matter. "You let me take contaminated water?" "No," I shrugged. "You took something that didn't belong to you. There's a difference. And technically it's not contaminated, just not something you'd funnel into expensive tanks unless you wanted modern art corrosion sculptures in your yard. If looks could kill, I'd be fertilizer by now." She stomped her foot. I swear, stomped, like a toddler denied apple juice, splashing muddy water up her robe and gasped, "This isn't over." Of course it wasn't. With Karen it never was. For the next few days, she paced her property like a general preparing for war, phone in hand, layers of indignation and suburban fury building like storm clouds no one asked for. She knocked on my gate twice. I didn't answer either time. And then came the inevitable escalation. 2 men in polo shirts and clipboards rolled up like she summoned a HOA cavalry out of thin air. One of them cleared his throat, and tried to sound official. "Sir, we're here to inspect reports of illegal water collection and hazardous materials on site." I smiled, pulled a folder from my workshop, because unlike Karen, I don't start fights without being ready to finish them, and handed over copies of land deeds, legal survey maps, and the HOA dissolution paperwork dated over a decade ago. "Unless you boys have a court order, you're trespassing," I said politely, because manners don't cost a thing. The HOA dissolved in 2007, and this land's private. Feel free to confirm with the county. One guy's eyebrows lifted so high they almost achieved liftoff. The other muttered something to Karen like, "We really don't get paid enough for this," and they left faster than a door-to-door salesman spotting a "beware of dog" sign. That night, I walked out to my barrels, tightened lids, labeled one in big black marker just loud enough for her porch light to catch. Tool cleaning water, high acid, because sometimes defense looks a lot like theater, and I've always been partial to a little dramatic lighting. Across the fence, she was watching, arms crossed like a gargoyle perched on resentment. "You're rubbing it in," she yelled. "No, Karen," I called back, equal parts tired and amused. "I'm minding my business. You should try it sometime. It's real peaceful on this side of sanity." She disappeared inside, but not before slamming her door. Classic move. A week later, her tanks finally gave out in full cinematic glory, metal groaning like dying robots, water exploding everywhere, and her out there armed with towels like she was going to plug industrial leaks with Bed Bath & Beyond's finest. Once the chaos settled, I thought maybe, she'd swallow her pride and move on, but instead, I got a thick, lawyer-branded envelope in my mailbox accusing me of negligence and environmental sabotage. Environmental sabotage? For collecting rain. I laughed so hard I scared a squirrel off the railing. Now here's where some folks would say escalate. Go nuclear, throw gasoline on the fire. But see, my dad once told me, when someone digs their own hole, don't grab the shovel for them. Just make sure you're not standing in the dirt pile. So I called my buddy Dean, 30 years in property law, kindest man alive until paperwork gets involved, and when I finished explaining, he chuckled a slow, deadly attorney chuckle that smelled like legal doom and coffee breath. "She stole your property," he said, "then damaged hers with it, then tried to sue you. We're filing counterclaims." He came by the next afternoon, briefcase full of righteousness, and we drafted a tidy, bulletproof packet. Trespassing, theft, harassment, attempted enforcement of dissolved HOA authority, plus photos from my security cameras of her hauling those barrels like she was smuggling them across a border checkpoint she invented. We mailed it. Karen got served. And oh, the sight of her pacing her driveway with that crumpled notice in hand was like fresh snow on Christmas morning. Pure, glittering satisfaction. 2 weeks passed, and then came mediation day. County courthouse, neutral ground, fluorescent lighting, and Karen walking and dressed like she was auditioning for the role of respectable suburban victim number one, pearls and pastel blazer included. Her lawyer looked young enough to still believe enthusiasm could replace experience. Dean? Dean looked like a man whose hobbies included winning and going home early to nap. Karen tried to launch into a speech about community standards and toxic water dangers. Dean just slid a photo across the table of her dragging my barrels across my fence line like she was reenacting a heist film, but with no masks, no getaway car, and 0 brain cells allocated to legal consequences. The mediator, bless her patience, leaned forward and asked, "Ma'am, did you remove property from his land without permission?" Karen's mouth opened, closed, tried again. Then her lawyer whispered something that made all the smug leave her face like air from a punctured balloon. By the end of that session, she signed a written agreement. Replace my barrels. Pay damages. Not interfere with my property again. Her signature looked like it was scribbled through gritted teeth. And walking out of that courthouse, the mountain air felt different. Lighter, earned, like the world rewards quiet stubbornness eventually. Now, you'd think that would be the end of it. Curtain drop, peace restored, credits roll, but life likes to sprinkle a little lesson dust on top of victory. And out here, peace doesn't always roar back. Sometimes it returns gently, hesitant, like a wild animal deciding maybe you're not a threat anymore. But trust me, the final act was still waiting on the horizon. I remember driving back from the courthouse, gravel crackling under my tires like the mountain was exhaling relief right along with me. And for the first time in months, My cabin didn't feel like a battlefield. It felt like home again, like the wind through the pines wasn't whispering tension, but going back to its old, easy rhythm, like life was sliding back into its right groove, slow and honest. I put up a new wooden gate at the driveway, heavy lock, clean sign, private property, no trespassing. Not angry, not paranoid. Just setting boundaries the way you put a fence around your garden to keep deer from helping themselves. No malice, just good sense. I anchored new rain barrels too, industrial plastic, chained to concrete blocks I poured myself, not because I thought she'd try to take them again, but because once you get burned, you learn to fireproof your peace, and I wasn't letting anyone else write their rules on my land ever again. Days passed, and the mountains went back to their old ways. Pine needles dropping like tiny soft rain. Blue jays squawking like they're auditioning for stand-up comedy. The smell of wood smoke settling into the evening air like an old familiar blanket. And I'd sit on my porch in the fading light with a glass of whiskey, letting peace seep back into my bones one quiet breath at a time. Then, one morning, maybe a week after court, I was splitting logs by the shed when I heard footsteps on the gravel road. Slow ones, uncertain ones, not the marching, clipboard-clutching parade music Karen used to walk to. I turned and saw her, hands shoved in her pockets, plain jeans and a worn sweatshirt instead of pearls and pastel armor. No trademark tight-lipped judgment face, just tired, human, smaller somehow. "Hey," she called, voice quieter than I'd ever heard it. I set down the axe, leaned my forearms on the handle, waited. "I wanted to, say I was wrong," she said, eyes never quite landing on mine, like she was afraid the air itself might judge her. "About the HOA thing. The barrels. All of it. I thought I was doing the right thing, but maybe I was just trying to control something I shouldn't. That's the thing about mountains. They strip ego off people over time, whether you like it or not. Wind and silence can humble even the biggest voice if they sit with you long enough." I studied her for a second, not to intimidate, not to gloat, just to see if this was real or one more performance in her endless theater of authority. But there was no edge, no fire, just fatigue and maybe a little shame. "I appreciate you saying that," I told her, simple, steady, no victory lap in my tone. "But understand something. If you just left me alone from the start, none of this mess would have happened." She nodded, swallowed hard. "I know. I just thought order was something you had to enforce, not earn." That made me pause, because for all the ridiculousness, the woman had cracked her own philosophy open right there, handed me the truth without even realizing she'd done it. And I guess life finds its own teachers, even when they show up wearing HOA badges no one asked for. "Go live your life, Karen," I said quietly, "and let me live mine. That's all the order this place ever needed." She nodded again, walked away slow, almost shy, and for the first time since she moved in, she didn't stomp, didn't glare, didn't turn her head for that last dramatic look like she was leaving a courtroom scene in her imagination. She just left, simple as that. Weeks rolled by like lazy creek water, and peace settled again. True peace. Not the tense quiet where you're waiting for the next knock or note or threat disguised in stationery. I patched the shed roof, built a new bench for the porch, swapped the tool cabinet hinge that squeaked like a squirrel in distress, and I let the rhythm of mountain life stitch up whatever stress had torn at me. Evenings came soft, sunset dusting the ridges gold, whiskey glass sweating in my hand, crickets tuning up like nature's orchestra warming for the night. And there were moments I felt the quiet so deep in my bones it was like part of me had roots in that soil, in those trees, in this solitude. One night, I sat there watching the sky shift from orange to lavender to that deep indigo that feels like you're staring into eternity, and I remembered something my dad told me years ago, back when calluses were new and I still thought the world rewarded volume over patience. "A man's peace," he'd said, sitting beside a dying fire, "is worth defending. But if you defend it with anger instead of resolve, you don't get peace back, you just trade one fight for another." I didn't fully understand it then, but I do now. The trick isn't swinging harder, it's standing firm enough the storm gets tired of raging at you. And yeah, there were moments where I wondered if I'd gone too far letting karma do the teaching. Moments where I thought maybe I could have warned her, could have stepped in. But then I remembered she didn't trip into my life looking lost. She marched in building a kingdom where she wasn't queen, making rules for land she didn't own, And sometimes life doesn't give you a gentle lesson when you refuse to learn the soft ones. The sheriff came by a couple weeks later, just routine, friendly nod, making sure the dust had settled. And as he turned to leave, he chuckled. Heard she's planting wildflowers instead of petitions these days. I shrugged. Nature's a good teacher. He tapped his hat. So's consequence. And then he drove off, gravel popping like punctuation behind him. Now, I'm not here telling you every Karen in the world will learn, or that every battle ends clean, or that stubborn people suddenly bloom into reasonable ones like daffodils in April. But I am saying this. Peace isn't given. It's built, protected, maintained like a good fence and a good fire. And when someone tries to take it, sometimes the kindest thing you can do for both of you is hold your ground and let nature handle the rest. Before I let you go, let me ask you this. What would you have done? Warned her? Walked away? Fought harder? Because mountain justice isn't a law book. It's a mirror, and sometimes it shows us who we are just as much as who they are. Drop your thoughts in the comments. I want to hear your take, your stories, especially if you've ever had a run-in with a self-appointed HOA overlord. Was I right? Was I wrong? Did karma go too far, or just far enough? And hey, if you're new here, hit subscribe. Join the campfire. We tell real stories out here, stories with dirt and wind, and lessons you only learn where the world gets quiet enough to hear your own backbone. Wherever you're watching from, may your peace be sturdy, your neighbors be sane, and your rain barrels stay right where you put 'em.